The story begins in one of the most luxurious mansions in the city. On this beautiful evening, there is a large-scale event, to which a large number of rich people have been invited. At this point, the party is just gaining momentum, when suddenly a waiter came up to Mr. Oliver and informed him that the evening games were about to begin, in which he had been personally invited to take part. The man smiled and replied that he wouldn't have to do it again. After all, the last time such evening games had not ended well for him. Oliver himself is the heir to the Viscount family, a rather famous man in the aristocratic circles. Despite his refusal, the waiter continued to lure the man into the arcade, enticing him with the fact that there are always games and free drinks for frequent visitors. In addition, the arcade shares the hottest news and promotions of the week. After listening to such an impressive advertisement, the man became interested and began to believe that today he would definitely make a fortune. The guests, who were watching from the sidelines, knew that Oliver would leave everything he had here again. When his wife lost her life, the man started gambling and lost the family fortune, which he inherited. As a result, he didn't even have a single plot of land left, so to pay off his debts he had to mortgage even the family coat of arms, which by its very nature is a priceless memory. The only real value he had left was his daughter Sophia, considered the most beautiful girl on the continent. It was the age of capital, the price of stocks and futures skyrocketed. It was the moment when the whole state went crazy with bonds and real estate. You could buy absolutely anything with money. Even things like title, power, honor, and the most beautiful girl in the city of Vinash. In the end, amidst heavy debts, Sophia became a mere material possession for her birth father, which he put up for sale. Initially, the girl did not understand the purpose for which she was brought to this place, so she promised that she would try her best. But when the people sitting across from her were told the initial cost, and in return they started to raise the rate, the world inside her turned upside down. In the end, at the end of the auction, the first beauty on the continent was sold for 50,000 gold pieces. At that time for Oliver this amount was of great importance. No matter what debts the man was in, there was no way to justify such an act. Oliver was no longer worthy to be called her father. He even with his own hands directed his daughter's gaze into the crowd, so that everyone would be convinced of her beauty, and have more desire to talk large sums of money. But that's not the end of the girl's misfortunes. Now she'll be tormented by a single thought. Maybe she should run away. But before that happens, she will probably be locked up and not allowed to do anything. Meanwhile, Sophia's personal teacher was getting a little nervous, because the girl had never been late for class until now. The maids were also tired of waiting for her, because according to the rules they couldn't leave the building until someone came to class. The teacher wondered if she was late because it was math class today, because Lady didn't like her, or if she had some good reason for not being on time. Sophia's never been late before, and she's never refused to do her homework. The only thing is, she was often bored in class, but that's normal for her age. That's why Madison had wanted to work with Sophia for a long time, because she had good potential. But that was until Oliver had financial problems. She was too young to deal with all this alone, and because she was so sensitive, tears came at once, so it was impossible to continue. Madison still can't understand how Oliver could do this to his kind, gentle daughter, because she didn't deserve to go through all this horror. Suddenly, the girl's father bursts into the study room and declares that she has just been kidnapped. Then immediately Sophia appears on the horizon. She was looking at her father with a fiery stare, and smiling very wickedly. Her father was shocked to say the least when he saw her there, but what did he care about her, because he had just sold her at an auction. Even so, the painfully distraught daughter agreed to talk to him after class. Oliver even had the nerve to try to stop her now, but no one was going to make concessions. Still, the girl was already late enough for class, so she slammed the door shut and went to the table. Madison looked very frightened, and couldn't think where to start the conversation. Well, the lady was not stupid at all, and somehow she managed to escape. All the suitors must be very excited at the news of the run-in. Young and shy, intelligent and polite, she had never before gone against her parents' wishes. And just because of her strong beauty, this poor girl is about to be sold to a complete stranger. That's what Oliver's daughter was like. But what happened to her was that in the presence of her mentor, the girl behaved differently than usual, arrogant but still elegant. She was also polite and more confident. She had never been like this before, but surprisingly it suited her well. During the conversation, the teacher noticed that Sophia had something falling out of her head. It turned out to be straw, and there are already all the signs that the girl was in a bag. She was really kidnapped. The saddest thing in this situation is to realize that her own father will not be able to help her. Since the girl was sold for a large sum at an auction, her kidnapping was planned in advance, so that Oliver would not be held responsible before the law. He also made it clear to everyone that whatever happened to his daughter, he needed to move on with his life. Of course, it sounded too harsh and sad for a 15-year-old girl. She would probably feel better if she said such things without holding back her tears. If a person is able to say it so easily, he must have lost all his moral values and cards a long time ago. Unfortunately, it is almost impossible to help such people. While listening to this story, Madison is in deep shock, and she wonders how Sophia managed to escape alone when she was kidnapped, and still show up to class in more or less good spirits, and without a scratch. Any other person could not have survived such an experience without any psychological consequences. The girl decided to refrain from answering this question, and asked a counter question. The thing is, the tea is getting a little bitter. What could be the cause? At first glance, this set of words looked more like a riddle than a question, which was why Madison didn't understand anything. The girl then decided to put it simply. She sold something more valuable than her body. Since the teacher had always been kind to Sophia, there was good news for her. Shares of the Wagon Railroad Company. There is no way to sell them, because they will soon fly to the skies and make huge profits. This morning, she woke up in a luxurious house and lay under a down comforter worth 2,000 gold pieces, her body enveloped by the warm sunlight and the pleasant scent of lavender. At times it felt as if she was still dreaming. From now on, Sophia looks at the purple trace left by expensive bathing products and becomes a little happier with the realization that she can afford it. No matter what anyone says, money has an almost direct impact on whether a person is happy or not. About 5 years ago, the company that was run by her father had a crisis because of his dissolute lifestyle, but in an instant everything changed, and she earned $1 million gold in just 1 year. Now in terms of income she is not even inferior to the counts. All this money Sophia managed to earn instead of her father. But deep down she knew that at any moment she could return to the days when she drank bitter black tea and trembled with fear. Back to the time when she saw suitors as a means of improving her life, and it wasn't her to choose, but her father had given the opportunity to all comers at the auction. Suddenly the maid came into the bathroom and announced that it was only half an hour before the stock market opened, and that she would start work at 9 a.m. The girl's face showed how much she wanted to continue lying in the bathtub and take at least 1 day off. The girl's face showed how much she wanted to continue lying in the bathtub and take at least 1 day off. But unfortunately she couldn't afford that luxury yet. So gathering her thoughts, announced to the maid the beginning of the preparatory process for going to work. This phrase implies in itself the duty of the worker, to make for the girl a beautiful hairstyle, to choose clothes for today and a few beautiful jewelry. In general, to do all the things that ordinary people have to do every day themselves. In the end, after all the procedures, Sophia gets an incredible look that makes all the men around her faint in a good way. She clearly knows a lot about style. On her desk was a document that fully described the situation on the market. Having analyzed it, it became clear that there will be no movements in Marsala's salon for some time, and if there will be no sharp drops and jumps on 3 positions, it is necessary to leave the contract for 20,000 shares. Also today Sophia is planning to make a deal in the heavy industry, so the maid needs to be taken after only in this area. At this time, the stock market at 9 a.m. was in complete chaos. People were almost climbing on each other's heads. Everyone wanted to buy shares of different companies so badly. This guy with a magic stone in his hand, named Lucas, works for Sophia, and acts solely on her instructions. With the help of a couple of these stones, you can communicate with each other like on the phone. Thus he broadcasts online for his boss all the events that occur in the market. His main task is to get as much useful information as possible about the companies and find out the value of their shares at the moment. This mysterious luminous stone with magical power used to be used only as a source of light, but Blago did not stop there and people continued to study the object, eventually revealing its inner potential helped the city to make a leap in technological development. From that moment on, it was a world in which anyone with at least a minimal understanding of the market could enrich themselves by investing. And Sophia, who was considered kind and gentle, became the brightest representative of this generation. In her circle, she was called a real genius of financial games. You can clearly see how she has changed from the beginning of her career until now. Suddenly, in the middle of work, Sophia abruptly ordered to sell 20,000 shares of Welsh steel, and all the others must be sold by the end of today. I wonder what reason she had for making such an impulsive decision. Even after paying all the debts to the company, the girl could not leave her family of her own free will, unlike men who are recognized as adults when they reach the age of 18. In this city, women are recognized as adults at the age of 23, before which time they do not even have the right to open their own bank account. Since the girl did not have enough economic power, it was difficult for her to become independent before entering adulthood. In addition, the average age of marriage for women is earlier than for men, namely at the age of 18, and if a girl wants to marry at 22, it will be considered a very late marriage. Also, men acquire certain status and privileges as soon as they are born. And women can afford it only if they marry well. But can you call a girl who is considered to be her own thing, not a loved one, happy? Sophia swore to herself that within 3 years she would leave this horrible place. Suddenly, the maid announced that guests were arriving. It was quite unexpected, because at this time of the day there was mostly no one coming. It was probably that pathetic Count again, who had already shown signs of attention to the girl more than once. Sophia was more right than ever. This man's name was Lucas, and he was hardly attractive. The only thing he can hook any girl with is his status and money, but he has no charisma at all. He is also close to the president of the bank in the royal family, so unlike other aristocrats, it is difficult for him to go bankrupt. Even Oliver tried to marry Sophia to him a long time ago. Appearance problems and lack of charisma are not the main reasons why it's best not to mess with him. The Count also has an evil daughter named Maria. If a girl enters their family, this daughter will most likely try to poison her. All in all, there are enough reasons not to contact him ever again. But since he was already here, Sophia ordered him in. It would seem that a man more educated than a woman would not realize that it is unseemly to enter a stranger's house so unceremoniously. It is necessary to make sure that he will not even think of coming back here again in the future. Meanwhile, Lucas was already waiting for the girl in the living room and drinking tea. When Sophia saw him, she immediately said hello and asked in advance, "Will today again be another attempt to propose?" The man immediately smiled. Since all his plans had already been revealed, it was not time to accept his proposal. After all, a woman cannot be called complete unless she has a partner with whom she will spend the rest of her days. It was a strange term, but Sophia agreed, and she would need a companion soon. Lucas was breathing hard after he said that, how much he wanted to be with her. Pulling a little intrigue, the lady with a smile on her face informed him that she would like to have a younger man by her side. These words not only offended him, but even angered him. He considered this statement disrespectful in his direction. After all, to truly love a woman must be malleable and polite. And then from the Count went a little threat that Sophia's reputation may deteriorate sharply if she continues to behave like this and constantly refuse. Lucas also promised that if she did not agree to the marriage, she would have to start selling all her luxuries in the near future in order to survive. Because of her foolishness, Sophia did not understand the Count's deep intentions and did not take these words seriously. From the Earl's words, we can understand that wisdom is gained through experience, and a wise husband believes in a happy wife by his side. But if you think about it that way, the best option for Sophia would be to marry Earl Howard. He is already quite old and even has gray hair, the perfect groom, dignified and wise. Sophia's plan is to go from extreme to extreme, and thus prove that they are not right for each other. Lucas couldn't even guess that he was being tricked, so he angrily began to explain the meaning of his words once again. As the girl once again pretended not to understand, the Count got even angrier and called her a retard. If the insults had already been used, then everything was going according to plan. Of course, Sophia apologized to him for her incompetence in this matter. But afterwards she immediately asked a counter question, since she was so stupid and inexperienced, then why Lucas wanted to marry her so much. As a result, the Count finally lost control of himself in anger, grabbed the defenseless lady's hand and squeezed it tightly. According to Lucas, if he started to teach her, everything would soon become clearer, and there would be fewer stupid questions. Sophia was really angry after such a sloppy gesture from the man. Since words could not convince her, he decided to use physical force. But surely a man with the title of Count would not want to spoil his reputation by beating a defenseless woman. Realizing this, the man began to avoid the subject, pretending that in this way he was just showing concern, and trying to put the girl on the right path. Since Sophia expressed herself excessively rudely, the guest decided to simply leave, but next time such humiliation, he is not going to forgive so easily. Judging by the expression on the hostess's face, one can understand that the next meeting will probably not come. I wonder how long we'll have to put up with this pig. It can't go on forever. Sometimes, left to herself, the girl dreams of becoming a man, for then she would have succeeded in all her endeavors long ago, and held a position many times higher than she has now. Most importantly, she wouldn't have to endure the vile advances of men she can't stand. If this man wasn't so close to high society, Sophia would have chased him away and never let him start again. But unfortunately in this world not everything is so simple. Women's rights are compromised. About 10 years ago, the Westwood family provided a large loan to quite influential people who were on the verge of bankruptcy at the time. They ended up gaining even more wealth and power with the support of the king. It was in this way that Theodore Westwood, president of the bank, was awarded the title of Marquis, and the royal family within a few years received a large sum of money. The best option at that time was to join such an alliance. But Sophia gave up that chance, so she had to cope alone. In the end, she managed to make more money than the alliance offered. The whole of Westwood tried to find out who was behind her. However, the girl managed to bypass all the traps thanks to her partner. Behind her back stood the king of the underworld, who stopped laundering money and started receiving a large percentage of the profits from the stocks. The name of this mysterious man is Eric. When he was very young, his life changed overnight. He first met Sophia 5 years ago wrapped in ropes in an abandoned building. It was the same man who kidnapped the girl on the street. She was not in the best position then. The only thing she was allowed to do was to keep quiet and not to disturb anyone. But even so, Sophia managed to find a common language with the bandit, and find out how much he was paid for the kidnapping. It was 90 gold pieces, which was enough money to live on for about 3 months if you only spent it on necessities. But what to do when that time passes? Do I have to go and deal with these bandit kids again for the rest of my life? In exchange for her freedom and competent cooperation, Sophia promised Eric millions of gold in the future. It sounded very tempting, but the boy couldn't understand how she could say such a thing when she herself had been sold because of the family's debts. The story of how to work a large amount of money, already by tradition, began with a riddle about tea, which Eric also did not understand, and generally thought that he was just mocked. Realized that the matter smells fried, Sophia decided to go straight to the point, and tell his plan, a large amount of gold. In general, the employees of the railroad company have been on strike for 2 months, all this because the Western Railroad, which is not even a year old, has already dreamed its work. The most important thing about all this is that Westwood Bank is behind it. He made a big bet that the company's stock would fall before the strike began. And when the stock didn't fall, the bank provoked a strike by workers who didn't take out big loans. From this we can understand why the tea tasted different in the end. The problem was not with the stove or the maid, they just replaced the coal used in the stove with the cheapest one. Since people in the city mostly have no money, they could only buy inexpensive raw materials, which are obviously cheaper than the ordinary laborers. But this begs the question, where did such cheap coal come from on the market? Luckily at that point, Eric knew where it came from. Because his younger brother had been stealing and selling fuel from the Western Railroad, for which he was destroyed. But the guy still couldn't understand how these events had anything to do with the big money. Because the negotiations had failed, the strikers were still there. According to Sophia, this was done deliberately. In fact, the discussions ended behind the scenes. If the shares of the railway company fell, the trains would start running again. In the end, the traffic was resumed after 2 days. In other words, the strike will definitely be over. So it's worth saving up and buying these stocks right now. Like selling all the remaining coal and magic stones as soon as possible. And invest it all in this railroad company. When the whole plan became clear to Eric, he asked what the girl wanted in return for this information. She said she wanted to be free from the obligation to marry all the men who bid on the auction, and another 30% of the profits the guy would get. Let's just say for a good start in life. Maybe today is the last chance to think this through. In the end, Eric agreed, but if the girl made him, he would surely find her and do whatever he wanted without any regret. Just the answer she was waiting for. From that moment on, their deal was sealed. Now, after all these years, Sophia recalls all these events with a smile. How much effort she had to put into convincing him. When suddenly Oliver walks into the room, all in a good mood with a smile, and call your daughter your favorite fool. The years go by and the father does not change at all. He had already heard that Lucas was bothering Sophia again, so he suggested that I kick his ass as a matter of urgency. In her heart, the daughter realized that even if she really did, her father would be the first to run to lick his wounds. I wonder what brought him here this time. Of course, for the sake of propriety, the father looked indignant. Can't he just see his daughter? Since it was already his hackneyed strategy, Sophia asked him to come straight to the point, so as not to waste too much time. Anyway, the Miss Maria that Oliver met yesterday is in very bad shape. The daughter immediately realized that her father wanted to leave the woman with a stock that would increase in value in the future. Since Marja is from a family with whom Sophia is not exactly on friendly terms, she immediately began to refuse to participate in this charity, citing the fact that there are no such actions at the moment. Since the daughter's account that she uses was recorded on the father, he accidentally saw the history of transactions. After hearing this information, the girl became very angry. Apparently the bank provided him with a statement. Oh, these laws of rotting Vinochi. Unfortunately, Oliver knew information about a salon, which in the near future should have a rapid growth of shares, and told this useful information to Maria. But instead of thanking her at least for this, the woman asked to tell her what shares to buy. Sophia was categorically against it, because she was 100% sure that in a few days, these shares will buy the whole city, and then they will definitely not grow. When he heard such a rude answer, Oliver began to cry, for he had promised to give the lady more information. In any case, it was his own fault. He should not have used such words. Besides, Sophia already had a bad relationship with Westwood. It could get her in trouble, which was not the right time. Since Eric was coming soon, the daughter asked her father to leave her alone so as not to distract anyone from the work process. Before leaving, Oliver asked her to think about his request one more time. When Eric entered the building, somehow he knew that the girl's father was here. But judging by Sophia's angry look, that's not what she wanted to talk about. At one point the guy stopped contacting her citing business. She is extremely curious as to what the real reason for this is. Turn on your male charm. He began to gently touch the girl's hair and talk about what a delicious flavor they have. This kind of behavior at the wrong time is very annoying. Realizing that the boss wasn't in the mood, Oliver grabbed the wad of money that was on the table and started to move towards the exit. Judging from the fact that the amount of money was quite impressive, Oliver probably wanted his daughter to give him a hint. Despite the fact that Eric wasn't in the mood for normal communication, Sophia asked him to do a good job of strengthening the protection of the account. The guy guessed from the beginning that there would be such problems, so he offered to open a business in his name. But at the time, it was better to trust an idiot who could lose all his money in cards than a bandit. Well, in that case, there's nothing more to say. Sophia smiled, because bandits always found something to say, just to get some favorable conditions for themselves. Then there was a short pause. Eric quietly put the money back on the table, walked over to the girl, gently took her by the hair and said that today he had come here to end Sophia once and for all. Luckily it was just a joke. The problem is that Sophia had prevented the Marsala salon from growing because she bought too much stock. Not knowing the ins and outs of the situation, she had no idea what she was getting into. Until now she had planned to get rid of all 30% of the shares because she thought they were worthless. Eric was very angry, because he warned the girl in advance to be careful. After all, the Marcel has connections, should have written to buy these shares long ago. Sophia kept insisting and saying that a business with genuine shares would never succeed. The fact is that the owner at the moment is Julia, the king's lover, and she is not just a lover, but the mother of his child. No wonder why the girl has never seen her at any of the events before. No matter how the country feels about princes born out of wedlock, they are still considered the king's sons. The authorities have already launched a secret investigation and are going to catch Sophia. But why did Eric tell the girl about it only now? He should have warned her beforehand. It was his job. The boy kept silent because he didn't know what the royal family was hiding. His personal affairs were going well and he didn't think about anything bad for once. The main problem is that the foolish father told Jacob everything. It's pretty serious because the source of money laundering was revealed. Also during the conversation it turned out that Westwood directly interfered with the development of the company that Oliver inherited. Now it's funny to see Westwood Bank lowering the price of Marsala stock. In general, because the girl is directly connected to the salon, the king hired a news agency called Blue Wing. Its mercenaries will search for Sophia, and will not stop doing so until it has successfully done its job. Sophia seriously considered backing out before it was too late. She had only managed to sell 5% of the shares because there was little or no reaction in the market. But in no case we must not forget that the king is already acting, and will not wait for Sophia to wash his hands. He will find out everything he needs and try to interfere. Eric so easily took the money that the girl had earned for 5 years, and in a difficult moment decided to leave her at once. Was it for him, all this long communication was just a business? You have to go to Lucas and beg for his help, because he is an old friend of the Marquis. If Sophia agrees to marry him, he will solve everything, and the problems will be over. In this situation, nothing stubborn, because as soon as the investigation begins, all the girl's accounts will be frozen. And if she freezes her shares, she will instantly become bankrupt. But unfortunately, if the king intervenes, even this method may be useless. In such a situation, it's better to throw money in the air than to marry a horrible man like Lucas. Eric also claims that Oliver made a pretty good profit on the whole thing. I wonder how he did it. It's a big problem, because there's a lot of disruption in the stock market all the time. It's a big problem because the stock market is constantly being disrupted. Sitting in the office next to such people, Oliver was scared for his life first of all, not for his daughter. It was already very difficult to deal with the president of the Alishi Bank, who had returned from another city after 6 years there. The purpose of this collection was to force Oliver to give up all the shares that he has from the Marsala Salon, namely this existing share of 25%, and the deferred 5%. He even began to be offered various favorable offers. But since the present owner of these shares is the daughter, the father could not make absolutely no decisions alone. The men tried to push the fact that it's Oliver's property by deed, and has nothing to do with his daughter. An immature girl needs a husband to set her on the right path, and luckily Lucas has long since expressed his desire to marry her. All that's left to do is to put just one stamp in the prenuptial agreement. Also, to speed up the process, Another clause was added to the contract: the girl's family will receive 100,000 of the promised amount as a security deposit. But if the terms of the contract are violated, the party who did it will have to pay 10 million. At that moment, Oliver began to feel two feelings at the same time. The first was joy for the 100,000 he might get, and the second sadness for the 10 million he might still owe if his daughter broke the terms of the contract. But the men assured him it was all to make sure Sophia couldn't back out of the engagement. In general, for a man who is very fond of alcohol and gambling, this proposal was very tempting, because in fact nothing to pay nothing, everywhere only benefit, and the Rain will finally already be married. The next morning a letter was brought to the girl's house, in which she read all this outrage. There she saw that in the case of termination of the contract, it is necessary to pay 1 million. Apparently the father knows how to bargain, since he lowered the price 9 times. Oliver immediately went to his daughter and apologized for what he'd done. But no change in this situation will not help. There is one of two things: either the father so much wants to marry his daughter, or he just sold her a second time. But did she deserve all this? Why, Oliver helps gangsters, and all sorts of acts against his daughter, do not have enough money in the family. In addition to selling his daughter, he made sure that she could only get a cash settlement. That's how he said he cared. It's a brazen lie. You gotta get in your face. Sophia has no intention of marrying Lucas and living with his daughter Maria. The girl is not going to pay the fine because she is going to spend the money as she wants. She earned the money to get her family back on their feet. Sophia called her maid and said they were leaving right away. The first thing the girls did was to visit a clothing store. There are many different brand name items. Sophia bought a full program: beautiful dresses, bags, jewelry, shoes, in general, anything, and most importantly, the selection of clothes was made by the main designer of this city. Even managed to buy a ring of a special shape, by the way, the only one in the city. Sophia had already earned enough to buy it all. Of course, it was not without a few problems: the fact that minors cannot spend money on their own according to the law of Vinash, so I had to secretly open an account under someone else's name. Earlier Eric helped with all these questions, but now he is useless. Now the girl can only trust herself. While choosing another piece of jewelry, the girl disturbed that most terrible Maria. It was an unexpected meeting for both of them. Of course, they did not lose the opportunity to humiliate each other a little. Initially she just said hello and then asked if she should be called Mom or just by her first name. This made Sophia laugh a lot, because she doesn't remember since when she became a mother to the worst daughter in this town. That's a lot of text for someone who's been sold out for the second time. The only conclusion is that Lucas is so pathetic that he has to buy his own wives. Since Sophia is not as free as some, she needs to go on about her business, so with a smile at Maria she wished her a good time, and in the future not to try to buy herself a fiancé. The red-haired one clearly did not have her day today. She lost on all fronts and was unable to give a decent response almost anywhere. In high spirits the girl came out of the store, nothing so cheerful how to put in place weak-minded rich teenagers. I wonder in whom she went with such a height character. The first thing that comes to mind is of course her father. After this meeting Sophia seriously considered paying the fine and fleeing abroad. That's a pretty good option. But the first thing to do is to find a broker where you can entrust your wealth. When suddenly an unknown man comes running out of the corner, grabs the girl by the waist, and takes her down a dark alley. But who could it be? Could it be Lucas's handiwork? Though it's strange because the contract hasn't been finalized yet. Had the girl run as hard as she could that time, only to fall into that hole again. In the end, it was exactly the same as the day she was first kidnapped. It is necessary to take control, because fear will not help. This time also need to find a way out of the situation. In the end the bandit revealed his face and asked why she was so scared. Because it was Eric, he just decided to make a joke. The bandit finally revealed his face and asked her why she was so scared. Because it was Eric, he had just decided to make a joke. But Sophia was very frightened and asked her not to do it again, because it causes a lot of stress, especially at such a dangerous time. In spite of all this, apparently Eric still didn't believe he'd really scared the girl, in which case I had to elbow him in the stomach. In fact, the guy came to help, and instead of thanking her, he got run over. I wonder why he'd want to help when he just said he was done with the girl. He really wanted to end the conversation, but because he's too kind to be indifferent. Of course, Sophia didn't believe it, and if he kept talking nonsense, she'd just leave. Realizing that the girl wasn't in the mood at all, Eric got serious and said that he had some important information, and if you didn't listen to him, you'd be sorry. The guy wanted to tell the news that the director of the Alishi Bank had returned to the city after 6 years. At the age of 26, this man, ahead of his two brothers, the true heirs, was the first illegitimate son that I managed to get the title of Duke. In a fairly short period of time, he created a bank called Alishir, the first in the country. Despite the interference of the royal family, the duchy, and Westwood, this man became influential not only in Vinochi but also in Romina. I wonder what Eric wants to say with this. Maybe he can be consulted about fleeing the country. In general, the guy personally knows the assistant of the bank. He is in debt to him. One day they met to talk, and Eric told Sophia about the situation. The girl didn't like it, because once again her secrets were being found out by an outsider. In response, the guy jabbed his finger in her forehead and asked her to use her clever head to think hard. Who has the worst relationship with Westwood? That's right, Alicia, and he is interested in Sophia, which means it's possible to get cooperation. At the end of the arrangement, Eric said confidently, there would be no wedding on the scheduled day. Meanwhile, at the bank, the old owner was getting to know his new job. In honor of his arrival, he decided to throw a ball, and invited all the aristocrats, because a grand celebration is planned. This man's name is Daniel, and he's a young up-and-coming Alakir owner. It so happened that on the same day on which the guy planned the banquet, Sophia's wedding was to take place, but since the Duke's influence is much higher, the wedding is likely to be cancelled or brought to another day. This lover of exclusively white colors is Daniel's assistant, with whom Eric is closely acquainted. Now that the assistant has given all this information to the boss, the responsibility for the ruined wedding falls completely on him. The girl who has this day wedding is making a lot of money, much to the chagrin of Westfad and the royal family. This girl with a bright and brilliant flair. Since the assistant owes Eric, he agreed to schedule the banquet for the wedding day. By the way, Daniel also wanted to buy a Marsala salon. She didn't even realize that Julia was the king's sweetheart. Daniel was also told of the fine the girl would have to pay if she didn't show up for the wedding, wondering if she could invest that much money in her freedom. Since the guy hasn't been in this town in 6 years, he remembers Lucas from when he was still married. As it turns out, their marriage didn't last long. About 10 years ago, the ex-wife was committed to a mental institution where she went completely insane. When Daniel turned 20 years old, he was appointed to be the head of the family. Until such an early age, this is considered a huge accomplishment. Since the boy was an illegitimate son, no one considered him a relative, and of course trying to destroy him to take over the bank. When such a person becomes the head of the family, people have a lot of questions, and when they find out that the real heirs are gambling and using illegal substances, everything falls into place. There were days when the brothers planned to poison the third extra, and Daniel had to survive among them with that thought. Despite his status as the head of the family, the boy never attended the events organized by the family. Always at such moments, he went to the garden, where he could hide from the outside world and be by himself. But that evening there was someone in the garden, and it was Sophia, a beautiful girl who looked about 14 years old at the time. At first glance she felt very bad, because she was sitting on a bench looking at one point. Even the approaching guy did not embarrass her in any way. When she wanted to get up, she almost fell to the ground, but Daniel was there to catch her gently in his arms. At first glance one might assume they were getting married, but in fact it was their first meeting in the garden. She smelled of champagne, which suggests that Sophia had clearly had too much to drink. Despite this, the lady of problems expressed gratitude for the help, but there was one problem: she too stained her shoes. On nerves, Daniel begins to look for what he has in his pockets, and finds a white handkerchief, which later handed to the drunken lady to clean her shoes. It was so cool, a girl from the richest family, absolutely sincerely pleased with such little things as a handkerchief, and no less politely thanked for the help rendered, according to her, than she was saved from disgrace. In the end, in order not to remain in debt, Sophia gave the guy one wish. It was great news, of course, a chance not to be missed. Since the boy had a problem that no one could solve, he wanted to discuss it with Sophia. At that moment, Daniel was being hunted by his brothers at least, and some were pushing too hard to marry his daughter. Instead of solving something drastically, the guy just sits and complains to a drunk girl. This fact really tears him up from the inside. One of his ideas was to move abroad, open another bank there and wait for everything to calm down. It's not a bad idea in principle, but it's more like just postponing the problem. The bigger the bank gets, the more furious its owner will be trying to destroy it. If you think about it that way, Daniel is just destined to have his life decided, a matter of time. This young man's own mother was in a similar situation. Only because she was a commoner she gave birth to a son to a duke, and then she was destroyed in the most horrible way. Sophia could fully feel this pain, because she had no mother either. Then at one point the girl asked not to say a word about it, and not to try to find out who she was. To save her property, it is necessary to open a charity fund, and donate all the money there. According to the law, the property of the foundation cannot belong to a person. Even if the owner of the foundation loses his life, the Duke will receive nothing, because the accounts will be empty. In order to avoid this, it is necessary to appoint oneself as the director of the foundation, and of course to appoint the nearest person as the heir. Then the Duke would definitely not get a penny, and most likely he would let the guy live, in the future, to try to annex the bank to the family. Danielle was shocked, to say the least, at how simply she had come up with the whole plan. Then of course it wasn't time, but the job had to be done as soon as possible. Danielle thought about it for months, allowed different theories and possible variants of events, and she gave the perfect idea almost instantly, and only about 14 years old, and the brain works better than some 30. Well, from now on, guys, the request was honored, the conversation was a success. The young man asked what he could do to thank such a clever girl. But she replied categorically that everything was fine, and she did not need anything. So she will surely manage all the financial difficulties on her own. And now, after all this time, Daniel has to see if it's true that this is the same person he used to hang out with as a kid, and if it is, he has to do everything he can to get her to the ball, so he'll pay his debt to her, and of course he'll get into the whole marriage thing, to help if he needs it. And after everything is settled, we must offer her a job, because the bank needs a genius like her. Meanwhile, Sophia was already picking out her dress for the fancy ball. And Lucas couldn't see how it could possibly mean a ball for all the aristocrats on the wedding day. He was also greatly annoyed by the fact that Sophia was not the slightest bit worried, and with great pleasure was going to go there. In any case, at least the wedding dress is not ready yet. It was necessary to postpone the wedding to another day as soon as possible. The girl asked him not to inform her personally about it. A letter would be quite enough. Apparently, Lucas isn't going to let it go. Why some duke would dare to disrupt his party? In fact, his anger is justified, but that doesn't give him any right to yell at his wife, because it won't change anything. Sophia herself does not like balls at all, but now is a different case, because this is her last chance to avoid marriage, which was given for the girl by the director of the bank, Alishi. Not to take advantage of such an opportunity would be a very stupid decision. For now, she does not know what he is really up to, but at least it will help to buy precious time. Every effort must be made to prevent this wedding within 2 weeks. No one can save the girl until she begins to act honorably herself. From this moment, Sophia made a vow to herself. She would certainly have 2 weeks to settle the matter. The time flew by like an instant, and the long-awaited ball came. The guests were slowly gathering. The party was gaining momentum. As usual, the local aristocrats were discussing how much money they had invested, and where they had made a profit. None of their meetings are without this topic. Since Daniel is a very powerful and rich man, he is always surrounded by many beautiful women. Maria was no exception. Looking at the guy, she literally fell in love with him at first sight, and realized that this candidate is perfect for the place of her future husband. Luckily, it's not a mutual love affair. In the end, very funny turns out, the Balwith hates him, and the daughter adores such provocative men. The girl decided not to lose the opportunity, and having gathered courage went towards the Duke to have a little conversation with him. The dialogue began traditionally with a cultural greeting. But instead of finding out how you are doing, Daniel said that he had already heard about the problems in the family of this girl. Maria immediately began to deny this fact, because in her opinion, the father and the future stepmother treat each other very well. In response to this, Daniel just laughed, because he knew how bad the situation was. Suddenly the whole room turns its head towards the entrance, and they start whispering about the people who are entering the building. It was Sophia, with her new fiancé, who technically isn't a fiancé yet. The girl chose her most gorgeous dress, which fits her perfectly. Because of her attractiveness, all the men almost turned their heads, including Daniel. Maria already realized that she had lost the attention of all the men with whom she had been communicating earlier, but for some reason she kept telling herself that the Duke still thought about her, although in fact it was not so. The man was so caught up in the goddess of beauty that he didn't even hear what Maria was asking him. The first thing Lucas stated imposed, no matter that he had to postpone the wedding, was his wife and property of the Adams family. From the outside it looked like an extremely insecure and resentful boy trying to save his toys. Of course Sophia is a girl with a temper, and did not tolerate such insolence, so also declared to the entire hall that she does not belong to anyone, only to herself. The only argument Lucas could make is that the girl is underage, but from the outside, only he looks underage, because the organizer of this ball opened his bank at 18. Suddenly, the guys meet Julia on the road. She was the owner of the Marsala salon that Sophia had tried to bankrupt. At first glance she appeared to be quite a nice woman, and was respectful of the girl. According to her, she just makes simple and cheap clothes, and is not going to wage financial wars with anyone. But this overly polite behavior did not affect Sophia in the slightest, because she is not so courteous to communicate politely with rude people. About business, Julia is right. Her clothes are simple and cheap. This design went out of fashion about 40 years ago. In general, she humiliated her as much as she could, and it all came down to the fact that the clothes from this salon were a waste of money, and there had never been any positive feedback from customers. In the end, Julia could not withstand such an onslaught, and hit the girl on the head with the palm of her hand. The blow was quite strong because there were even scratches. Lucas continued to just stand there like an insecure boy, and did not even say anything to Julia, because he would not dare to go against the king's beloved. That's how rich life is. He who has a little more status can afford anything. A man to be, you don't even have the right to follow your woman with dignity, because if you don't, you might lose your life. Even so, a real man should not be afraid of losing his life or some status. If his beloved is offended, he will do anything to protect her. In this case, the relationship with Lucas is ridiculous. The circus doesn't end there. The guy grabs her hand and starts begging her to listen to him. But even so, Sophia insisted on being released and given the chance to be alone. It got to the point where the girl was in pain from her hand being squeezed too hard. Handsome Daniel came to the rescue and subdued that insolent Lucas. With just one hand, he made him beg for mercy. Then the bank owner asked if the girl's wrist was hurt, and added that she didn't deserve to be treated like that. Looking directly into his eyes, Sophia realized that she couldn't disagree with more than one of his words. This is the man from her basics, with whom she would like to spend the rest of her life. Daniel did not feel the competition so much that he announced in front of everyone that he would steal the girl for a while. Lucas was shocked by such impudence. He even tried to do something, but the Duke managed to lock the door so that no one dared to interrupt their private dialogue with Sophia. The girl herself couldn't believe he'd stolen someone's fiancé so easily. It was as if he did it every day. She was certainly grateful for the help, but somehow it all came out of nowhere. Because Sophia was addressing him too formally, the guy thought she didn't remember the night they met in the garden. Initially, The girl really couldn't remember, but when the Duke told her about their meeting 6 years ago, she did start to remember something. That day Sophia mixed up champagne with juice and got drunk. As she was only 14 years old, the effect did not take long to show. Since there was a lot of champagne in the end, it was hard to remember anything the next morning. Daniel was very upset by this information, but he did not give up hope, and decided to ask the question in a different way. It sounded like this: how to survive if your relatives want to destroy you because of money. In this way he wanted to make the girl try to remember what she had said to him that night. Then he even tried to help her a little, saying that the best thing to do was to set up a charitable foundation. But Sophia categorically said no, because that way before, the law was changed and now nobody is interested in such organizations. In other words, it worked until Daniel did it. That time has passed. Now the government won't approve a new fund set up to protect assets. But 6 years ago the idea was just fine. After this story, Daniel walked up to her, took her hand, and earnestly asked her to apply for a job at his bank. Meanwhile, Lucas called the guards to break down the door under the pretense that his wife had been kidnapped. In order not to be interrupted, Daniel decided to grab the girl's hand and take her somewhere else. But it was not that simple. Sophia pulled her hand back and said that it was not nice to do that to girls. How could he not notice at once? This is really the same girl he met 6 years ago, a real genius of her work. Despite the seriousness of the situation, she keeps calm and elegant. These are the two most important qualities of an investor shareholder. In that case, the Duke went back and politely asked to go with him. Sophia kindly agreed, and gave her hand back. Eventually the guys left in time to chat and go back to the hall through the other entrance, while Lucas was trying hard to open the door, which was just closed on the other side. When he saw that the guys were already in the hall, he immediately ran to meet them and told them in front of everyone that if Daniel wanted to get his bride, he had to pay 1,000,000 gold pieces. The people around just started laughing, and Maria blushed profusely at the embarrassment she had to endure. Daniel admitted that he wants to get Sophia because he truly fell in love with her at first sight. But he doesn't have 1,000,000 on his hands at the moment, so literally within 30 minutes, he's bound to find one. Lucas had no idea that someone would even think of buying his girlfriend out for such a large sum of money. Anyway, even though it's late, Daniel decides to congratulate Julia, since she's the manager of the Marsala salon. In just 1 minute, she's supposed to be notified of something bad. And within a minute, one of her workers comes up to her and tells her she's bankrupt. At one point she seemed to lose her mind and started shouting at the whole room that it couldn't be. At the same time, Daniel smiled wryly and realized that it could be. The Queen was just incredibly furious. After waiting for the stock market to close, Daniel covered up the illegal activities of the royal family because they clearly crossed the line when they put a man in distress. To be honest, when Sophia arrived at the event, she immediately realized that the Duke was strange. He pretended to enjoy the ball, but he was actually giving orders the whole time. And his assistant must have been watching everyone and getting a taste of the action during the ball, which is genius. Of course, Daniel also spoils other people's lives because of his greed, but to put a person in a position where he has to always do the work of others is much worse, because it is necessary to live on the money earned by your own efforts. Depriving a person of this opportunity, you deprive him of life. In the end, right in the middle of the hall, the Queen began to faint. It is much harder for a pregnant woman to experience such stress, but the people she made grief was no less difficult. But now their suffering is over. Even Lucas could believe what he was hearing. Julia had given up the Marsala salon. And then, from the realization of everything that had happened, fell to his knees and began to cry hard. Originally the guys were just going to have a good time at the party, but everything turned into chaos. Daniel stood there contentedly looking down on everyone and feeling great. At last the moment had arrived. The scene that the Duke had imagined many times, to get one man's good, had played out successfully. In the meantime, Sophia was already dealing with Eric. As she had asked, the guy had stolen the documents and brought them to her. The security of the court data was much stricter than one might imagine at first glance. Now Eric really hoped that there would be no commitment between him and Sophia. But he was wrong, because the girl would not forget all the wrongs so easily. If he really wanted to earn her forgiveness, he'd have to work for hire for another 3 years. Deep down, the guy knew that if he fell for her pretty face again, things would be bad. He still can't believe that he agreed to steal such important documents. It's all because of guilt. In principle, if Sophia continues to pay money for the work done, then we can continue to cooperate. But the offer was more of a joke than an actual offer, because if Eric messes up his relationship with the royal family, he's finished. In that case, it was time to say goodbye. In general, initially the guy did not come for that, but just to control the situation. Since everything went just fine, the guys shook hands, hugged goodbye, and that's where their cooperation ends. Meanwhile, Daniel was in a slight panic, because his target was either Julia nor Marsala, but Sophia. But the protagonist of this evening disappeared somewhere, and suddenly the girl grabs the Duke by his clothes and turns his side. The first question she was interested in was how much the guy earned on this event. Daniel decided not to ask her how she knew about the income, but simply said the sum of 1.5 million gold pieces. In that case, Sophia demanded a share, because if it wasn't for her, the Duke wouldn't have been able to get hold of such shares, so she had every right to a share. The guy turned out to be pretty greedy, and started citing a law that says the Duke doesn't have to pay anything. In this case, since Daniel hired the girl, she asked for a bonus for contributing to a big deal. But to pay nothing, he said he didn't hire anyone. Then the last question about love, at least for these words the Duke is going to answer, or he also just refrains from answering. And for this one, the guy was ready to take responsibility for it on 100%. The guys headed towards Lucas together to discuss their pact in more detail. Thanks to the Marsala Salon situation, Daniel suddenly has 1.5 million gold. Isn't that great? In that case, the Duke is willing to pay 1 million gold pieces of collateral right now. Lucas agrees to the offer, and sells the woman he loves to another man. The people around him were shocked by the passion. As a friend, Sophia abruptly asked me to stop talking, because the Duke shouldn't have to pay 1 million gold pieces. The girl just wondered what he'd do by saying he'd take responsibility. It's a very honorable thing to do, but where does he get the urge to solve other people's problems? The fact is that Lucas is the first solution to the contract. Having possessed certain documents, it was possible to find out that the Count sent a certain amount every month to a psychiatric clinic. Thanks to this, Sophia was able to find out the address and meet his wife. After asking her a couple of questions, she said that she had not signed the divorce papers. The specialist said clearly that this signature does not belong to her, it was simply brazenly forged. If the divorce is recognized as invalid, the marriage contract will become irrelevant. Since there was such a bad situation, now Lucas is obliged to pay compensation for the girl. Sophia would be waiting for her 1 million gold pieces soon, otherwise she would have to go to court. Daniel realized that he and Sophia were alike, because they liked to take revenge on their enemies in front of everyone. A woman like her doesn't need a man's support, at least she can get by without it. Danielle should do her best to take her to the Bank of Alicia, where specialists like her are highly valued. Without wasting a moment, he ran after the girl to talk to her. Even so, it would be hard for her to get the 1 million gold pieces. Lucas will sue her more times than pay, because the court is on the side of the royal family. They will act solely in his interests. And even if there is a payout, all the money will belong to Oliver. Well, I'm so Sophia's formalities don't make any difference, because that money wasn't honestly earned. By the way, Westwood definitely has a grudge against the girl, too. For safety's sake, Daniel suggests she go to work in his bank, because he is financially stronger than Westwood, and can protect the girl from any disasters. Sophia still can't understand why she's so important to the Duke, and how he knows her skills are worth it. It's simple, the guy wants to destroy Westwood. But besides Westwood, the Duke has another enemy, the King. Why fight two at once when you can take them down one at a time? Daniel was shocked, to say the least, that the girl knew such hidden information. Investments and funds are suspicious of the royal family's business. the Duke needs to be careful too. Neither the royal family nor even the bank knew that the business was suffering, and Sophia could only realize it by looking at the investment history. Even if the girl agrees, how much will she be paid? Because she is a minor and cannot open her own account, which means that all her wages will go to her father. Frankly speaking, Sophia obeys her father only for one reason. When he loses his life, the girl will still inherit all the property. The main thing is to keep him within the limits, and not to let him lose everything in cards. There's nothing better than the certainty of a guaranteed inheritance. In that case, Daniel asked if he could provide such certainty, the girl would work for him or not. It could be organized in one simple scheme. For example, he could take away his parental rights and then the girl would be free before she reached her majority. Eventually Daniel will take custody and make Sophia the heir to his foundation. In case the guy loses his life, the entire foundation will go into her hands. Now that's a really fiery proposition.